The University of Cambridge Library houses one of the largest collections in the world of medieval Jewish manuscripts from the Cairo Genizah, found in the Ben Ezra synagogue in the late 1800s. Solomon Schechter brought much of that collection to the University of Cambridge, and Dr. Estara Arrant gives this introduction.
Hi, I'm Dr. Estara Arrant. I recently completed my PhD thesis here at the University of Cambridge, working on a medieval repository of texts known as the Cairo Genizah, one of the largest collections in the world. In Cambridge, we have 25,000 fragments of the Hebrew Bible. So I only looked at even 1,800, which seems like a lot. It's only a small chunk of what's out there as far as the Hebrew Bible in the Geniza. And my thesis worked on Bibles written or produced by everyday people in everyday contexts for study. Some of them were written by scribes in accessible format so that someone could go and buy a copy of the Bible to study at home. Some of them were written by lay people themselves to study before the service in the synagogue, and some were even written by children in school. And now I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the Geniza Research Unit, where we have all of our Geniza manuscripts, looking at the history of the Targum text as it evolved over time and place. My postdoc isn't just restricted to the Geniza, it's actually spans manuscripts of Targum from Europe, from Spain, from the Middle East, and we're looking at the history of the text and trying to reconstruct basically a genetic tree of Targum practices over time and place. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm here today to give you a tour of some of the manuscripts that I studied to show you the vast diversity of form and of engagement with the Hebrew Bible between the 10th to 15th centuries, which is the main period of my corpus. According to Jewish law, if you have a text that is sacred, has God's name on it, or is relates to scripture, or a prayer book, which we have many prayer books in the Geniza as well, you can't treat it with disrespect. And if you're done using it, you can't just throw it away, and forget about it. It's a holy object, and so we have this practice of Geniza, or putting them in a sacred place to just decompose, kind of like burying them. In fact, some Genizot are actually they've been buried, and some Geniza manuscripts were found they had been buried as well. But what's special about the Geniza is that not only sacred texts, but basically any text written in Hebrew script, or any text that was, we think people were getting rid of their documents and thought, well, I don't want to sort through all my documents, I'll just put them all in the Geniza, which is why we get so many texts essentially put into the Geniza. And from every mundane subject, we have receipts in the Geniza. We have a sheet of music represented in the Geniza. Someone put some text to music and put the musical notation. We have legal documents. We have Qurans in the Geniza. We have trilingual Bibles, which I didn't get to show you, which are, they have the Hebrew and then the Aramaic Targum and then the Arabic Tafsir from Saadia Gaon. There's almost no subject of life that's not covered in the Geniza. We have documents by women, we have shopping lists, we have everything. We have halachic texts, we have works of literature, poetry, everything. So we'll begin our tour by looking at Bibles produced by highly trained scribes as actual works of art. So they would have been written by one person, and the nikud, or the vowels, would have been put in typically by another person. And we have large codices, which is books, massive books that people would buy to refer to in the synagogue or to have as personal family Bibles if they were wealthy. Many Bibles that look like this were those that formed part of what we use to create a critical edition of the text, made by professional Masoretes who put in the vowels and accents of the text, because they're so important for our understanding of the history of the text, and for our understanding of how the text became codified into a tradition. but it's been written in a very large, beautiful hand, probably from Egypt. And this would have been used maybe, perhaps in the synagogue to have a reference text, because when you read in the synagogue, you usually read from a scroll, which has no vowel points. And then you want to refer to a text to make sure you're reading the vowels properly. And here you can see the vowels have been put in faint ink. And the writing is in a different kind of ink. But it would have been very large. If the full page would have been very large. And the years of training to go in to produce such a beautiful handwriting would have been many, many years. So this is the epitome of scribal practice in the Middle East and North Africa, Mediterranean at this time. So as we've seen great Bibles, or monumental Bibles is what we call them. But what I want to show you guys today is texts that go beyond great monumental Bibles. Bibles that didn't seem so great or monumental, but Bibles that were casual or a bit more informal. And so we'll start our look at these informal Bibles by looking at how people were educated in the Geniza. So one of our most famous manuscripts we have this really beautiful page. So this was been maybe from a textbook, as we're going to call it, a textbook or a primer for children, and it's beautifully colored. You've got the menorah, and you've got a scribe who has written in the alphabet or some of the alphabet and the nikud, which a child would look at this and then they would make copies of their own. Or the majority of people would at least be literate enough to write their own name, to sign official documents, and to be able to read and understand the Bible in the synagogue. So education in the Middle East at this period was commonplace. This folder, which is we have quite a few, is representative of many children's exercises. Someone who's not very well trained in calligraphy is practicing out the Hebrew letters and the vowels as he goes across the page. Someone who would be perhaps practicing to learn to write, maybe in scribal school, maybe not. And on this side of the page, you can see micrography, which is small Hebrew notes, which you will see in great Bibles, but they've been practicing the micrography in various shapes on the page. And the Geniza preserves this mundane writing exercise, really, as an example of what education produced in this period. Much of the education was more than monolingual, it was bilingual. So here we have a writing exercise of someone practicing out the Arabic alphabet. But on the other side of it, if I can turn around, we have the person practicing out the Hebrew texts. And we do have a lot of evidence in the Geniza for bilingualism. This is a favorite Bible of mine. It's got on one side very educated scribal writing, very beautiful, and on the other side it's got more casual, relaxed writing. Obviously the person is educated, but this may have been a booklet where you have more educated and less educated hands, so someone's practicing and they'll use as a template. And as you can see on the back, it was actually a booklet, and so we have more writing here, and then this was this was a blank page, so there would have been the beginning of a section. The booklet here is something that is easy to carry and portable. It's not like our massive, grandiose Bibles, which are huge and you can't pick them up. This would have been something portable and easy to carry. And actually, a lot of these, for example, here's another booklet. He's practicing the alphabet with the nikud, with the vowels, which they usually tend to have a specific order. So usually tend to go from A vowels to U. One of our smallest Bibles right here, and it's probably someone's personal copy to study. Many of these Bibles were of Leviticus, because children, when they began school, would start studying Leviticus. And so if you have in the Geniza a scrawled out passage of Leviticus 1, it's most likely you can think that's from a child learning in school how to write. Another example, in fact, you can see just how pervasive the studying culture was. is this Bible. And I say Bible because we have page after page after page after page. I think I counted around 60 pages of this Bible. Now what's special about this Bible is that it's not the most beautiful script. It's not calligraphic and decorated and ornamental, but it's very well written. It's very legible. It's fantastic. He's got, the vowels are clear. He corrects himself. Sometimes he writes over. It's one of my favorite Bibles because it just shows that someone was able to, could afford to buy paper and to copy out the entire Bible or the entire Torah for himself in the Geniza period. It's a mitzvah to copy out and study the text. I mean, obviously you want to do a scroll, but if you can't do a scroll, you can do a book and you can have it your own copy, which reflects a high rate of literacy and a high rate of engagement with the Bible. People were, this was a major part of this person's life. I mean, I don't know how long it took him to copy this out. He's very carefully doing it. So he adds extra lines that aren't necessary for the letter to be read, like the Aleph has some ornamental strokes, or the Lamed has a little ornamental stroke, for example. So he's trying to write nicely. He even corrects himself. And he's added in the vowels, and the vowels aren't too big, they don't overpower the page. In some of the children's writing, they don't write vowels that are a good size, they don't have a bit of, they're not educated enough to do that. So he's written vowels that are appropriately sized, and he's even written in accents. So perhaps to help him learn to read the text out loud if he has to read it out loud in the synagogue. So what this tells me is this is a literate person who's not trying to write a beautiful piece of art. He's trying to write a functional text, and he's very good at it. And this was on paper. Paper was still expensive enough that if you had paper left over, if you had margins left over, you would reuse it. So we do see a lot of that in the Geniza as well. Parchment's very expensive. I mean, you have to kill an animal, you have to repair the parchment, you have to, so parchment, like these Bibles, these great Bibles here, which are written on parchment, would have taken a lot of resources and time to produce. Whereas papers, which the main paper trade in the Geniza started in the 11th century, would have been much more economical and easier to produce in mass and sell. So you see, in fact, of the common Bibles in the Geniza, the largest proportion that I have are on paper. Shall we continue on? So speaking of paper Bibles, so we've seen a Bible written on paper by someone who is perhaps more of a casual writer, a literate layperson. But now we have Bibles, many of them in the Geniza, which were written by professional scribes on paper, which perhaps could have been purchased for study. They come from around the world. It's not unusual for the Geniza to represent many regions, so we think, based on the script, that this Bible is possibly from Yemen. This Bible has the Masoretic notes, you can see. It was professionally made. This is a scribe writing it. But it's small, and it's portable, and it's on paper, and it would have been more accessible. So we have a range of regions represented in the Geniza. I have a couple of Bibles from Europe, fragments. This is one of two, I think, from Yemen, but the majority are from Egypt or the Levant, Syria, North Africa, and Spain. That's the majority represented in the Geniza. But we have many examples of professionally or ranges of less or more professionally produced paper Bibles. Here's an example of one that was done by someone who's probably, he's well educated, but he's very casual writing, and he's going at it. And he doesn't space out his words, and his lines aren't straight, but he's written himself a copy of the biblical text. And next to it we have preserved so this is a square Hebrew script. It's got right angles, but then you can see a different register. We have a semi-cursive Hebrew script it's got more angles, more connections between the letters. It's a quick documentary hand, what we call in the Geniza. Bibles written in a semi-cursive script were more likely than not written for casual use. So the fact that a Bible's in a documentary hand means its convenience is prioritized over, say, formality or aesthetic concerns. And we have many of these. So here's another kind of semi-cursive, a bit more square, but it's a full Bible, or a text of the Bible. Here's another one that's much more casually done. He just crammed in a bunch of text onto the page, alongside one that would have been very easy to look at and read. He's got wide lines, very beautifully formatted, written by a scribe, and in a small but very beautiful hand. So what this represents is practicality. We've got practical Bibles. We've got people studying for practical use, people writing, producing texts. Here's another example. Some of them had 2 columns, like this one, which is a special kind of formatting. So it's difficult to fit 2 columns on a small sheet of paper, which has sort of been the original size. And a range of centuries is preserved. So you can tell by some of the scripts that they're earlier, some of the scripts that they're later. Paper tends to be slightly later. The youngest Bible I have is one I think is from the 16th century. They're the 1600s, because the reason is because he has Vayikra at the top margin. So, meaning he's put the name of the book of the Bible that he's copying at the top, which didn't happen before a certain period. And so you have a range of periods of Bibles. Many of our parchment Bibles are very old, whereas I do have some based on the script we think are 15th century Egypt, for example. So you've got a range of centuries. Another thing I want to show you is an example of scribal interplay. So we have in the Geniza Hebrew, we have Arabic, we have Aramaic. This fragment is one that I recently published. It's got many pages of it. We've preserved it separately in this book. It's a fragment of Targum passages to the Haftarot, which are read after the Torah in the synagogue. And it's written in, well, first we see this one hand, which is not the most beautiful hand, but it's competent. It's able to get the job done. And he writes page after page. And then a little bit of the way through, we see a new person come in. And he writes an extremely ornate, complicated text. He writes a little bit, and then our other scribe picks up again. And then he continues on. And then you see our new scribe again, and they just have this interplay throughout the text that they've copied. And what's really interesting about this, you see this word here, which is misspelled. It's supposed to be the beginning of a haftarah. Now in Torah, it begins with the letter Hey, but here he's written it with the letter Aleph, which is a misspelling. But because the majority of people in the Geniza were native Arabic speakers, oftentimes you see, and I suspected it was like an Arabicized spelling of the word haftarah. Well, my suspicions were confirmed later, because you have on this page, at the end of the haftarah, he writes in Arabic, tamat al-haftarah, which is the end of the haftarah. He writes in a fluent Arabic script, and as you can see, it's spelled with the Aleph in Arabic and not a Hey. So his Arabic actually impacted the spelling of his Hebrew, because you can see he's made a bit of an error there, and the error is clear, but and it's correct in Arabic. So you can see a bit of interference of language, and in fact I do have some actual, we call biscriptality, where you see 2 different scripts represented. I had a passage of the Bible from Genesis, and our writer is writing along in Hebrew, and at the end of the line, either he gets tired or he's just trying to quickly write, and he switches mid-word from Hebrew into Arabic script, and it's just amazing to see the interplay of languages. So in this Bible, we have 3 languages. We have some Hebrew represented, we have Arabic notes, and we have Aramaic, which means the study of the Bible in the Geniza was not a monolingual effort. At the very end of this fragment, we have So he signed his name Menachem, and we can't make that out. Av Habanim, and he continues to write, and some of it's been erased. So someone has signed their name in this Bible. And it's not really a Bible, this is actually a collection of passages of the Haftarot to be read. So it served a practical use. We have a record of what passages get read in Aramaic at the end of the Torah service on Shabbat. Essentially what this would have been. We're going a bit up in quality. So we've looked at children's Bibles, writing exercises. We've looked at everyday Bibles written on paper by everyday people, literate laymen. And we've looked at Bibles written by scribes on paper for a variety of purposes, and even a record of like the passages used in a synagogue. So very practical things. But now we're going to go a bit up in quality. So there's still not monumental great Bibles, but they're more high quality than what we've seen. And this is one of my favorite examples because this is a is that good? Can you see without the glare? A 2-column parchment Bible written in a flowing script that is very skilled, but it's a bit casual. I mean, you can see just from, and it's been, if you can notice where it's darker, he rewrote when it faded. So this was used over time. But my favorite thing at the beginning here, he writes, and I'll translate in English, "In the name of God, I set my pen," at the beginning of the book of Genesis. But it actually rhymes. So, B'Shem Adonai kol nasi asid, Batchala Sefer Bereshit. So we can see in that you have Bereshit. So he's written himself a little rhyming note at the top of the Bible, which is not something you see in great model Bibles. It feels more casual to me, looking at all of the things I've seen. And it's absolutely beautiful. And it's one of my favorite texts. But yes, so this is, and it's on parchment, by the way, so parchment was much more expensive. And you can see it's on parchment, you can see the wrinkle of the skin. And his hand is a bit more, it's kind of somewhat, it's still square, but somewhat in between square and semi-cursive, so it flows. So it makes it look more practical. But it's vocalized, he's got accents, so it's a full representation of a Bible. And with this charming little rhymed bit of poetry at the very top. On to more formats of Bibles. So this one is a bit hard to see because the text was so crammed and it's been damaged, but it's a small parchment Bible with 2 columns and the text is just so small. He may have been able to fit the whole Torah onto, if we had the full book. Do Bibles that are produced like this follow a format? Is it haphazard? Are they trying to have a style of book? And so a Bible like this with wide margins, as you can see again, the margins are very, very big and the text is very small, is a style. And I found multiple Bibles like this in this style. Whereas you can see that Bible there is 2-column parchment. It's a bit bigger and the text is not so crammed in and it's easier to read. And the margins, the proportion of text to margin is not so huge. So this is a different style of Bible, and they varied across the centuries. And you get people will put their names or names of who the Bible was for. So the Yehuda HaKohen, Ben Yosef. So these are personal objects as well. They're not just So here you have. They actually put so it's the Sefer HaEliah is of Shemot and with the Targum. One of the most prominent, and by prominent I mean memorable, styles of Bibles which I found in my research were these right here, which this is a 2-column parchment Bible, and it's a long oblong landscape, if you will, format. And what's special about this is we have a parallel in Islamic book culture of having long oblong Qurans that are formatted similarly. And I have a whole subtype of Bibles that look identical to this in type. And we do have evidence in some of the decorations on Bibles that there was overlap between Islamic book culture and Jewish book culture. Just because it shares a format doesn't necessarily mean, oh, this is an Islamicized item. We can't say that. But they do share that. We have Qurans that have the same format in common with a Bible like this. And so we have many types. Lots of these Bibles in this format I found paleographically, I think, come from the Syria-Palestine region, though that's not to say they don't come from other regions as well. It just seemed to be concentrated in that area. However, we do have some really beautiful Bibles later on in the 14th century, for example, from Spain, which are 2-column parchment, such as this one, which is absolutely gorgeous. So as you can see, it's a full Bible. It's got Masoretic notes, and he's got micrography. So the Masoretic notes are written in little patterns along the bottom. He's marked the parashah with some drawing, some illumination. I do find actual colored ink in some Bibles. Here's another page of this Bible. Paleographically, it's probably 14th century Spain. But again, notice how small it is. It's easy to carry, but it's a work of art. I mean, the amount of training that would have needed to learn how to write that small is, incredible. And you can see some geometric patterns here at the bottom. And even you can see he's been reused. So when the letters faded, he'd rewrite. Someone would come in with different ink and rewrite, the script. So this was an investment. People wouldn't just use these, and once they got damaged, okay, that's the end of it. They would keep them and use them over and over and over and repair them. And this Bible should remind you of a monumental Bible in the same kind of format. A beautiful text here, but that's still small, still perhaps used in a more practical context, or even not. Maybe they wanted a small, ornate Bible as a formal artifact. But we've come full circle. So we've seen everything from scrappy children's exercises and big Bibles to, small but beautiful, ornate Bibles from Spain. And we've covered the whole Middle East, basically, at this point. So it means that there's a huge amount of diversity in this period, a huge amount of literacy, lots of languages coming together on the page. For example, if an Arabic speaker, he's trying to copy out a Torah for himself, will interchange vowels in Hebrew with vowels to reduce the vowel inventory. So, for example, Arabic doesn't have an E vowel like eh. So a and e are reduced to one vowel in Arabic, and so you often have a segol and a patah in Hebrew would get coalesced into one, so he'd interchange them throughout the page because he doesn't hear a difference. Well, in Yemen, they have a tradition of reading the Bible in all three languages on Shabbat. So we have quite a few copies of the Bible in this trilingual format that we think are from Yemen, that are in the Geniza. And so they'll have, for example, the Hebrew script will be large and have vowels, and the Targum may not have vowels, or sometimes they have vowels, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have the Babylonian vowels, which are above instead of below. And then you have the Arabic script, which is, and it's often it's Arabic, so it's often in a Hebrew script, but it's in a cursive script, and it's very flowing, so you can tell the language based on what the script looks like. So verse by verse on the page, they'll do like that. It's a really fascinating format of Bible. I think it's almost impossible to study the Geniza if you only can use one Semitic language, because there's so much multilingualism in the Geniza. A common register of Arabic in the Geniza is Judeo-Arabic, which is Arabic written in Hebrew script as well. But we know that people were learning both scripts to study and to be able to be literate, for example. So I want to highlight the preciousness and importance of even the most mundane little text that I look at. Because what it represents, and why I think we often overlook, especially in scholarly studies, we tend to overlook little things, but it represents a culture. Like, I get to see into a culture of learning the Bible text. I get to see into a world that got preserved, and that's something that you can't really put a value on. I'm learning new history every day that aren't in textbooks that we didn't know about before. What more could we learn if we continued studying these Bibles? Is my they should continue to be studied. Is my, and I want to do it. I want to keep going. So, yeah.